All right, so let's jump in. All right, where to start? Okay, so my prayer is that this material that we cover over the next 6 weeks will be fundamentally change how you engage with other people in sharing your faith and the message of the gospel. So our conversation is called Tactics, a game plan for discussing your Christian convictions. And it's based on a book by the same name, written by Greg Koukl, that's him there. So whether you are a football fan or not, you likely know that before every play, the offense gets together in a huddle to lay out their plan for engaging their adversaries. The plan they lay out helps improve their odds of success in moving the ball down the field. Like football players, the odds of moving conversations about your faith and Christian convictions in a positive direction will increase if you have a plan. So as we move ahead, we'll talk more about what you should consider success in these conversations. So the plan is to be together for 6 weeks, and over the next 6 weeks, we've got a couple of goals. The first goal is that you would feel comfortable in maneuvering graciously through the conversations with those who you disagree with.
Hold on a second, Benjamin.
Our second goal is that you learn the art of maintaining appropriate control in your discussions with others, or as we'll refer to later on, as staying in the driver's seat. So I've got a question for you guys before we really get into this. This study will be a time for us to grow together and learn from each other. To help us do that, a little feedback there. So if you guys wouldn't mind, make sure that you're muted unless you're talking. Be a huge help. Thank you. So to help us, I'm depending on all of you to participate and be interactive. And to get us started on this path, I'd like to ask a couple of you how you'd finish the following sentence. When I think about discussing Christianity with non-believers, how would you finish that? Do you enjoy the encounter? Are you willing but nervous? Does it scare you? Or do you do everything in your power to avoid it altogether? So what do you guys think?
Avoid. Debbie says avoid.
Avoid. Oh, okay. Anybody else?
I sometimes think about whether or not it's offensive.
Yeah, that's interesting. Some people can be offended. And I'm hoping that we'll learn some new ideas for you to be able to maneuver in those conversations without being offensive. Anybody else? Anybody charged full ahead and looks to jump in every single encounter about faith?
Well, it depends on the situation. Like when I go out with Danny and we go to, I don't know what's the best term, to get people to talk about Christianity and what their faith is. When we do our Saturdays, sometimes it used to be uncomfortable for me, but I got used to it really quick and it just became easy because I go in with the attitude assuming that most folks don't want to talk about it. So it kind of spurs me on to want to talk about it more because I know I'm making them uncomfortable.
I'm hesitant. With I guess it just depends on who I'm beginning to talk to. I would do better just probably one-on-one or something, rather than in a group if I had to go out and it had to be done out. Because I think for me, it's because people are always going to hold me to my past. So a lot of times they don't listen. I try to bring it in with my family mostly. If it's other people out there, I don't really have a problem. But with my family, I try really hard to talk to them about that, but I can be hesitant because they're not really gonna listen to me because it's just like a hold me to my past thing. They're gonna always see me in that way. Like they know how my grandmother raised me. They know, and for them, I was a goody two shoes for that. So they weren't okay with me being like that. So they had to do something. Something had to be done for me to not be on that level. So yeah, that is it. I think it's just for me, who depending on who it is. But I can be hesitant with that.
Yeah, and I certainly understand that. You know, I think it was Jesus who said, even a prophet has no honor in his own hometown. You think about the people who have known you coming up and see you as a certain way, even though there may be a radical change in your life, they still kind of hold on to that old you. So hopefully, again, we'll be able to give you some tools to be able to navigate those conversations, even if they continue to have that stance. I appreciate everybody's feedback. So moving on, have you ever been to a conference or sat through a lecture and listened to it, or listened to a podcast, or saw a how to share your faith video? All of these are great, but they always seem like there is something missing to help you go into the discussion with confidence. There's a missing bridge to help you get from the content to the conversation and from the scholarship to the relationship. And that's what we are doing, helping to give you that missing bridge. And we'll start by defining tactics and warn you of some of the dangers of using the tactical approach. Then I'll suggest a significant change in the way you approach evangelism. This I'll introduce to you first, and the most powerful tactic, the one that is the core of the game plan. But before we get there, let me say a quick note about apologetics. Does anyone know what the word apologetic means?
When you say apologetic, like apologetic, when you're to me, apologetic means being sincerely sorry for something you may have caused upon someone. And it can be in different ways. You may be apologizing for stepping on someone's feet. You might be apologizing for hurting someone's feeling. And when you're apologetic, that's just something that, to me, that's within you. It's a proper way to be being apologetic. That's the type of person. Being apologetic and saying an apology, to me, is like two different things. You know, being apologetic, it seems like it's a part of you. That's the way it goes. That's who you are. You're apologetic.
Thank you for that, Ms. Tamika. And I would agree that there are a lot of people who have that same idea about that term, but that's not actually what that term means. You know, it's not an apology, or it's not apologizing to someone. This term, apologetic, actually means to give a defense for what you believe. And sometimes apologetics gets a bad rap. Some folks think that phrases like defending your faith or defeating false ideas and destroying false ideas sounds combative and full of conflict. And people who think that way don't dialogue, they fight. In addition to the image problem that apologists face, they also have another barrier to overcome. It takes more than just having the right answers these days. A lot of folks simply don't care about the facts or truth. They simply want to believe what they believe. They will ignore what you have to say and may yawn and walk away. Some, however, stand and fight. They will jump into battle with guns blazing and hit us with a barrage that we aren't expecting and may not feel up to defending. But let me show you a Bible verse here real quick, and this is Matthew 10:16. Matthew 10:16 says, "Behold, I am sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves, so be wise as serpents and innocent as doves." This verse calls us for a tactical approach, and even though real spiritual warfare is going on, our engagements should look more like diplomacy than D-Day. Now I want to talk about tactics, what they are and how to use them. So our need for tactics concerns our commission to be effective ambassadors for Christ. Just like it says in 2 Corinthians 5:20, therefore we are ambassadors for Christ, God making his appeal through us. We implore you on behalf of Christ to be reconciled to God. Our ambassadors have 3 essential skills. The first one is knowledge, an accurately informed mind. Second is wisdom, an artful method. And then third is character, an attractive manner. These skills play a part in every effective engagement we have with a non-believer. The second skill, the artful method or tactical wisdom, is the focus of this course. Now we need to talk about the difference between tactics and strategy. Strategy involves the big picture, the large-scale operation, one's positioning prior to engagement. I use the term strategy in reference to the tremendous resource knowledge available to us to be adequately prepared to give an account for the hope that's in us. Just like 1 Peter 3:15 says, but in your hearts honor Christ the Lord is holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for the reasons for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect. So in our case, Christianity has strategic superiority. It is well positioned on the battlefield because our ideas can hold up under serious scrutiny compared to other views. We have an excellent case. We have the best answers to life's most important questions. So our strategy covers content, information, and reasons why someone should believe that Christianity describes the world accurately, all of which fall under the heading of either defensive or offensive apologetics, or intellectual defense of the truth of the Christian religion. Defensive apologetics answers direct challenges to Christianity. For example, it responds to attacks on the Bible, on biblical authority. It answers the problem of evil. It addresses Darwinian macroevolution. Offensive apologetics, on the other hand, makes a positive case for Christianity. For example, it provides evidence for the existence of God. It supplies evidence for the resurrection of Christ, and it presents evidence of fulfilled prophecy. Our strategic concerns include a number of contemporary issues. You guys have probably heard some of these. They are things like the radical relativism and skepticism of postmodernism that denies the existence of objective truth. That would include moral relativism. All moral truth is individual or group-based, and religious pluralism. All religions are equally valid and true for those who believed. The competing view on Jesus's identity is another one. The problem of evil, which is a big one. There are also ethical issues like abortion, homosexuality, human cloning, doctor-assisted suicide, and the nature of marriage. Also a big one these days. And then lastly, an example of the historical accuracy of the Gospels. There's a lot of people who push back and say that they're not accurate and they're conflicting and all kinds of good stuff. So in contrast, tactics literally refer to the art of arranging, deploying one's assets, the details of the engagement. Tactics, simply put, are about how we maneuver in conversations, allowing us to use our knowledge in creative ways, choreograph the particulars of our response, style our response to objections, employ specific methods in addressing attacks, and guide us with sound reasoning, clear thinking, and aggressive advocacy. Often, a clever commander has the advantage over a superior opponent through deft tactical maneuvering. So we want to make sure that we have that mindset that we're going in and we're using a tactical approach. But I do want to tell you that tactics are not tricks or slick ruses. Clever ploys to destroy non-Christians, focusing them or forcing them to submit to your point of view, or attempts to belittle or humiliate or add notches in your spiritual belt. Instead, tactics should help you manage, not manipulate, control, not coerce, finesse, not fight, navigate through the minefields, and put you in the driver's seat of the conversation. We're going to talk a lot about that over the next couple of weeks.
So
and I wanted to
Chris, can I
offer
have a
these.
question?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I was thinking of tactics as I recall one time taking my daughter to an event, and one of the presenters was talking about always being prepared. It wasn't anything related to evangelism, but it was a situation where they were trying to teach teenagers how to be prepared. And the way that you're prepared is obviously planning ahead. And that's what I think about when I think about these tactics, when you say that it's not trickery, but it is about being prepared. And generally speaking, tactics related to evangelism are pretty consistent because the story is consistent, right? There's nothing about the gift of salvation that changes. So anyway.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And thank you for that, Mr. Linda. Somebody's getting artful with their marking up my slides. That's all right. So I would absolutely agree with you. And I think having a game plan going in, just like we talked about the quarterback having a huddle and talking about what their next moves are, we should have that when we're going into a spiritual conversation. We should have a tactical game plan to help us maneuver through that conversation and help us make some points and to point out any inaccuracies of their thinking and just maybe straighten some folks out. And you're absolutely right. At the core, we have the truth, and the truth doesn't change. It's not relative. It's not personally dependent. So my truth is not different than your truth. Truth is truth, regardless of who you are. So you're absolutely right. And I'm not sure who gave you that advice, but I think they were spot on. All right. So getting back to the reasons for my warnings about the tactics. First, tactics are powerful and can be easily abused. It's not difficult to make someone look silly with these techniques. So I don't want you to do that. That's absolutely against what how we should present ourselves as ambassadors. If you're going out making people look silly or making them feel stupid, you're doing it wrong, and you're actually causing an offense to Christ. So second is because the illustrations in these sessions are abbreviated accounts. They may appear harsher or more direct or more aggressive as we recount them, and not necessarily reflect accurately how they were really received. So we've got an example that we're going to review in a couple of minutes of something that Greg talked about in his book, and it is a condensed version of what happened. So if it sounds abrasive or abrupt, it probably wasn't in real life and wasn't received that way by the person he was talking to. So I do want to say that we do mean to be direct, focused, and challenging, and we do not mean to be abrasive, abusive, or alarming. And the goal is to find clever ways to exploit another's bad thinking for the purpose of guiding him or her to the truth, yet remaining gracious and charitable at the time. So sometimes it's a balancing act, but that's really our goal. So I want to talk about gardening versus harvesting. And this is the key insight that Greg had. He said, before there can be any harvest, there must always be a season of gardening. And this insight completely changed Greg's approach to his conversations with non-Christians. Virtually no one becomes Christian overnight, especially today. And Jesus said in John 4:35 through 38, he said, do not say, there are yet 4 months, then comes the harvest. Look, I tell you, lift up your eyes and see that the fields are white for harvest. Already the one who reaps is receiving wages and gathering fruit for eternal life, so that the sower and reaper may rejoice together. For here the saying holds true, one sows and another reaps. I sent you to reap that for which you did not labor. Others have labored, and you have entered into their labor. So notice in this verse, the breakdown, there are two seasons. There's gardening and harvesting, and there are two kinds of workers, sowers and reapers. But there's only one team with everyone rejoicing together. The question for you is, are you a gardener or a harvester? Gardening takes more work than harvesting, since harvesting is easy when the fruit is ripe. This would lead us to believe that we likely need more gardeners than harvesters. And I personally am a gardener, and I bet most of you are too, at least most of the time when you talk with others about spiritual things. And and maybe you've been sitting on the bench out of play because you weren't a harvester. Now you know where you can make a difference, and the difference is in the gardening. And do you guys know what I'm talking about when I use the terms gardening and harvesting, sowing and reaping?
Yes, everybody that you minister to or witness to or evangelize to is not, like you said, may not receive Christ at that moment. So I'm gardening, and every once in a while, blue moon, maybe you get someone who has been through the gardening process with someone else, and you evangelize or share with them, and they do come to Christ, and that's the harvesting.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. Yeah, and there are times when people, the first time they hear the gospel, come to accept it and give their lives to Christ. But in my experience, that is the rarity. Normally, it takes a long period of time. It takes thinking. It takes answering objections, and it takes showing people how you live and conduct yourself with other people. That is the gardening part. The harvesting part is when they actually bend the knee and accept Christ as Savior. So my goal, since I'm a gardener, I'm not focused on harvesting. My main goal is to simply put a stone in their shoe. I want to annoy them in a good way, and I want them to get them thinking. I want them to see that Jesus is worth thinking about. And those are our goals as gardeners. Now let's get into the tactical game plan. And here's what my promise to you. I'm going to give you a game plan that will allow you to converse with confidence in any situation. It does not matter how little you know, or how knowledgeable or aggressive or obnoxious the other person may be. It's a game plan that's simple to follow, yet tailor-made for each individual, and will help keep you in the driver's seat of the conversation. And note these instructions by the Apostle Paul. This is Colossians 4, 5 through 6. Walk in wisdom towards outsiders, making the best use of time. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person. And notice here that very last phrase, answer each person. Each person, not there are times when people get hung up on answering the problem and they miss the person. So if somebody comes up and says, why would a good God let a toddler get cancer? We have reasons for that we could talk about, but it's entirely possible that that person just lost a child to cancer. So we miss the person completely. So that's something you need to be aware of when you're talking to people and they're offering objections. Don't ever miss the person. All right, so in other words, be smart, be nice, and be tactical. When I talk about staying in the driver's seat, I mean in control of your interactions with non-believers. And let's talk about an example conversation that Greg had with a young lady he met at a photo center. So I'm going to recount this to you, and you guys just have to follow along and use your imagination. So Greg goes up to the counter at the photo center, and some of you younger folks may not know what a photo center is, but we actually used to have to take film in to get it developed before we actually got our pictures. They weren't instant on our phone. So Greg walked up to the counter and he addressed the woman. The woman was wearing a necklace with a pentagram on it. And Greg asked, does that necklace have religious significance, or is it just jewelry? The woman replied, yes, it has religious significance. The 5 points stand for earth, wind, fire, water, and spirit. Greg asked, does it have significance for you personally? And the woman said, yes, I'm a pagan. It's an earth religion. So Greg responded by saying, so are you a Wiccan or a student of witchcraft? And she said, yes, we respect all life. So Greg asked, so then that would make you pro-life regarding abortion, right? And she said, no, I'm pro-choice. Greg said, That surprises me. Isn't it unusual for someone in Wicca to be pro-choice? And the woman said, well, I know I could never do that. I could never kill a baby. And you guys need to pay attention to that phrase, kill a baby. The woman went on to say, I wouldn't do anything to hurt anyone else because it might come back on me, kind of like karma. And Greg said, but shouldn't we do something to stop other people from killing their babies? And the woman said, I think women should have a choice. Greg asked, women should have a choice to kill their own babies, right? And she said, well, I think all things should be taken into consideration on this question. And Greg said, okay, tell me what kind of consideration would make it okay to kill a baby? And the woman said, incest. And Greg said, let me see if I can understand you correctly. If I had a 2-year-old child here next to me who had been conceived through incest, in your view, I could kill her. Is that right? And the woman said, well, I guess I'd have mixed feelings about that. It might have been a little bit difficult to follow that conversation, but in this short encounter, we can see how Greg used 3 foundational tactics to help him challenge the young woman's faulty thinking. First, he asked 9 questions. He used these questions to begin the conversation and gather information from her. He also used these questions to exploit weaknesses in what she had said. He tried to show the inconsistent and contradictory nature of her views. On the one hand, she's a witch who respects life. On the other hand, she is pro-choice on abortion, a procedure she characterized as killing babies. Third, he used a tactic that allowed him to show her the logical consequences of her beliefs. She thought incest was a legitimate reason to kill a baby, again, using her words. And then he asked her about a toddler who was conceived through incest. The conversation left the young lady using her own reasoning as a legitimate reason to kill a toddler. The value of using the tactical approach is simple to help you stay in the driver's seat of the conversation. It allows you to productively direct the discussion. It forces the other person to do most of the work, and it helps avoid conflict. And remember, if anyone gets mad, you lose your chance at making a difference. And one of the things that Greg always says about this is if he's having a conversation with somebody and that person gets mad, then he loses. If he's having a conversation with somebody and he gets mad, he loses. So if anyone gets mad in a conversation, then you're probably going to lose in that conversation.
Okay, question. Okay, so that story. So the incest, is that the same as saying like, because I've been asked that question too. So like saying that you don't believe in abortion unless a woman is raped or unless it was like incest or something, then that would be a reason to not have a child. Is that like what you're saying? Is that what he was?
Well,
is that the same thing? Do you understand what I'm trying to say? Like, you don't believe to say you don't believe in abortion unless if the woman was raped by someone unknown. So if the woman was raped by someone unknown or something, or you know, the incest is either way, it's still wrong to not have the baby.
Well, let me ask you this. You mentioned rape, rape specifically by someone you don't know, and then there's rape by someone you do know. Is either of those cases of rape acceptable?
No. So I didn't say the other part, but I was trying to get an understanding of, you know, like, is that the same? Because I've heard this question it's been asked to me, it's been asked to, you know, I've heard it asked to other people. So I was trying to get, like, you know, the understanding of what was being said.
Right. Yeah, and that was really the focus of his conversation. The focus of his conversation at that point was to show the inconsistency of her thinking, where she is thinking that all life is to be honored and respected. And, you know, some of the Wiccans won't even smash a bug because they think that life is so precious. But on the other hand, this person in particular was okay with aborting babies, which is killing babies by her own words. So to the
Okay.
question that you're getting at, you know, kind of a side conversation, but I think it's important to think about what's different about rape or incest. It's still killing a baby. So if
Yeah.
you're killing a baby because you can't afford it, I think most of us would agree that's not good. If we're killing a baby because it's whatever the reason is, you're still killing a baby. Taking another life without regard for that life is wrong, regardless of whatever brought that life around.
Hey, Chris.
Yes.
Seems like that anybody that is pro-choice has insulated themselves with the fact that they're killing a baby. I don't think they think of it that way. They think of it as a problem. They don't think of it as a person. I think that's how they can do it, you know. And that's you know, they don't believe that this is a baby. Now, this person that he was talking to, she does believe it was a baby. But most people that can go through an abortion, they have insulated themselves with the thought that this is really a baby.
And I would agree with that. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Miss Debbie, that there are people who would argue that what they're doing is getting rid of an unviable tissue mass or something like that. And those are absolutely things that we can talk about later. But I want to make sure that we stay focused on the current conversation and not get too far afoul.
Can I go back to that question that you gave, you know, about how, if somebody asks you why God would let a child die of cancer?
Yes.
That's what, see, that things like that, I'm going, I have no clue. I have no clue why God would do that. You know, that's my fear, that I'm going, what good would my witnessing or whatever, when I don't understand God's thinking? And so how can I convince someone else that he's a loving God when I don't understand why he does, why things happen? You know, that you know, how could I persuade anybody when I am so conflicted and
Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
that is what we grapple with all the time. And I think what Chris had mentioned before is we get so focused on having the right answer that we're not even looking at the person. Maybe and correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but I think when the focus is back on the person, then you're able to connect with that person, because you have to connect with them on some level, and just remember that the goal is not to harvest, the goal is to garden. And so Chris, I don't know if you're going to get to the end of that, but he never actually finished that conversation with that woman. He's standing in line at the photo center. He goes about his way, but he planted that seed. Somebody else is going to come and plant another seed or water it, you know. So we don't always have to have answers.
Ms. Shalanda, you are spot on. You are absolutely right. We don't always have to have the answers, but if we can help folks understand what they think and help get them to the root, then eventually, if they'll go home and they'll think about the conversation that you had and think about how think a little bit differently about these issues, then at some point someone will be able to harvest those folks. You know, and Miss Debbie, to your question, you know, you think about how could a parent lose a child, and would you say that is terrible?
Sure, yes. I mean, it is for the parent.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
it's not bad for the child because they're with the Lord.
Right. Yeah, and I can hear the emotion in your voice, and I know that is absolutely an emotional issue. And one thing, as Ms. Shalonda said, you have to never lose sight of the person. So you have to kind of skillfully listen to what they're saying. And if you hear that kind of emotion in their voice, then there's a good chance that that person may have, if they're coming up to you with that objection, may have lost somebody close to them in a similar way. So don't lose.
So what should you say to them? That's what I'm saying. I mean, I have
So what
condolences
recommend-
or what?
Well, absolutely. You need to express empathy for somebody in a situation like that. But one of the things that you need to keep in mind too is that God gave his son to die on a cross for all of us. And you think about losing a child, what must it have been like for God to offer that sacrifice for us? Giving his child to suffer horribly, and the indignation and everything else that came along with him being born of a virgin, living for 32, 34 years, whatever the case was, and then ending up on the cross, naked and bleeding and shredded from head to toe. How hard that was for him. But he did that for us, and he did that because there was an ultimate good on the other side of that. Now, with our own children, we struggle with losing them, but we don't know what good may come out of that and what God's ultimate purposes are. So I think that's something that we need to keep in mind when we have those questions. So that would be kind of the conversation I had with someone who brought that objection to me. But does that help at all, Miss Debbie?
Possibly.
Okay. All right, so let's try a little role play. All right, so our scenario number one here is, we're calling it There Is No God. So here's the scene on the screen for you. You're at a dinner party at your friend's house with some of your close friends from church, and the conversation ranges naturally over a number of interesting spiritual topics. And suddenly, to your surprise and embarrassment, the host's 15-year-old son announces with some belligerence that he doesn't believe in God anymore. He says it's simply not rational, there's no proof. So the challenge that I want to put to you guys is, your opportunity will pass quickly. You only have a few seconds to initiate further dialogue, but you want to do so in a way that's productive and will help everyone in the room reflect intelligently on the issue. So what would you say to that young man who said that it's simply not rational to believe in God and there is no proof? What do you guys think?
This is Danny. I might ask, start having a conversation about the nature of truth and just, what is the standard of proof. That's something that a lot of times is kind of taken for granted. People just assume we all rational people have the same understanding of that, not taking into consideration that there are different worldviews that conflict with one another that determine how we understand the world. So.
Yeah, I think that's good. Yeah, I would ask them about what they mean by proof.
Okay, so we should ask him what kind of proof he wants. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think Danny's question was, what do you mean by proof?
Oh.
I'm thinking I would also ask him, how did he come to that notion? How did he come not to believe? So we can maybe get more information about what he's thinking.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that's a great question. That will help mine more information out of him to help you start thinking about, how to move the conversation in a positive direction and help this young man understand the folly of his thought. That's really good.
I'm kind of, because my questions are not coming out the way they are in my head, so it's a little hard. But that situation I know all too well because I have a cousin that's like that. we were on a family trip, and we were all in the kitchen and we were talking. So of course, her mom she's my first cousin. We're first cousins. And we were talking and she said, I don't believe in God, but I believe there's a higher power. And I was like, you don't believe in God, but you believe there's a higher power. So I guess I may have been drugged up at the time, because my first question to her was, yeah, so you don't believe in God, but there's a higher power. Who's your higher power? Does he or she have a name? And she said, I don't know, but I believe there's someone higher. I said, is it a physical person? It's spiritual? Like, I mean, I don't know. It kind of, I know she's not the God person, but I didn't know that she just had it to that point to where she say, I don't believe in God. So I asked her, hey, so how do you think you wake up in the morning? She said, I wake up. I get up. I wake myself up. I get up. I said, so how are you breathing? How do you take your how do you take your breath? You know, um, how do you manage to go to work every day? How do you pay your bills? How do you get out of situations that you're in that you get upset about, and then when they work out, how do you think that happens? I mean, of course, since she doesn't believe in God, someone has to stand in proxy. I guess that's what they say, which would be her mother praying for her, because her mother knows that she doesn't believe in God. So that's the thing that I know all too well. And I tend not to argue with people when it comes to, speaking about the Bible. I just don't, because I don't feel like people getting angry or me getting angry is the way to do the thing. So that's something I know all too well. But I did talk to her about it. Never heard her say anything pertaining to God. No anything. No anything. I've never heard her say anything pertaining to God. As far as a discussion. But you know what I did hear her say? Oh God, how can that happen?
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah, that's very interesting. That's very interesting. But I do continue to talk to her and send her scriptures and stuff like that, things that she may I think maybe she just may not be she may feel like there's a wrong answer. I mean, a wrong question if she asks or whatnot. So, but she did
Yeah.
say that she don't believe in God, but she believes there's a higher power.
Yeah. And Ms. Tamika, I think you handled that really well by asking those questions. And I think that by doing that, you probably helped her start to see that maybe what she's talking about isn't true, and she needs to go back and think about that. So it's entirely possible you planted a stone in her shoe, like we talked about. So I think you handled that really well. So thank you for sharing that. Move on to the next one. Another role play kind of thing. This one is about the Bible. So you're riding the university shuttle with a friend who notices a Bible in your backpack. He says, I've read the Bible before. It's got some interesting stories, but people take it way too seriously. It was only written by men. After all, men make mistakes. You can try to recall points your pastor made a few weeks before about the Bible's inspiration, but you come up empty-handed. So the challenge is, you didn't know your friend had any exposure to the Bible until now. You're concerned about keeping the conversation productive while being sensitive to the fact that other people on the shuttle might also be listening. So how would you respond to this friend? What do you think? How would you respond to somebody that says that the Bible was written by men and men make mistakes?
I mean, I guess I would lovingly tell that person, that, you know, the Bible was actually God inspired. Men just wrote what God told them to write. And for the very reason that you just mentioned, men do make mistakes. That is a very true statement.
Yeah.
Let's
Absolutely.
start there.
I might ask the guy, assume, because he was assuming something about God, and that's that God either doesn't exist or that he's not, as God, the Bible describes him as being sovereign, powerful, and able to overcome, you know, human our finitude, you know, our humanness. He's assuming that. And so I would say, I might ask him, you know, well, assuming that there's a God who's sovereign and who's able to intervene in human affairs, how do you think that might affect human ability to write something from God without error, something that's reliable, that represents God himself? Like, how would that affect having the assumption that the God of the Bible, as the Bible describes him, exists? So, like that.
Yeah, I think that's a good response. Thank you, Danny. All right, so let's talk about the Columbo Tactic, and let's get into kind of good approaches for conversations, just like we talked about. So the Columbo Tactic is the queen mother of all tactics, and I'm using my rock and roll air quotes here. It's easily combined with other tactics, and it's the simplest tactic imaginable to stop a challenger in his or her tracks, to turn the tables and to get them thinking. Plus, it's an almost effortless way to put you in the driver's seat of the conversation. The Colombo Tactic is named after Lieutenant Colombo of the long-running television series Columbo, a brilliant detective who appears to be bumbling, inept, and completely harmless. With his rumpled trench coat, stub of a cigar, and a borrowed pencil, Columbo looks like he couldn't think his way out of a paper bag. While putting his foes at ease with his harmless demeanor, Columbo then employs his trademark approach. And he says something to the effect of, "I got a problem, something bothers me. Maybe you could clear this up for me. Do you mind if I ask you a question?" And then once they answer his question, he says, "Thank you, you're a very intelligent person. Oh, and just one more thing." And then he'll ask them another question and they'll respond to that. And then he'll say something like, "I'm sorry, I'm making a pest of myself. It's because I keep asking these questions, but I can't help it. It's a habit." So this is the kind of habit I'd like us all to develop. And the key to the Columbo Tactic is to go on the offensive in an inoffensive way with carefully selected questions that productively advance the conversation. Simply put, if you hit a roadblock, ask a question. Never make an assertion when a question can make the same point. With planning and practice, this tactic can become second nature. Using questions offers tremendous advantages. Questions are interactive and invite others to participate. Questions make headway without requiring you to state your own case. Questions shift the burden of proof to the other person. And most importantly, the Columbo Tactic puts you in the driver's seat. This technique is particularly useful where you work. It makes it possible for you to subtly move your case forward without preaching to others. The Columbo Tactic is your game plan. It has 3 unique applications, each launched with a different kind of question. The tactical game plan provides you with an easy-to-apply, step-by-step approach to having a conversation about your convictions. It gives you an incredible margin of safety, since asking questions instead of making statements or claims protects you from having to defend your own point of view. The plan makes it easy to pursue friendly conversations and avoid unnecessary conflict. And the first application of the Columbo Tactic is to gather information. The very first thing you want to do in any conversation before you do anything else is use questions to get the lay of the land. Think of it as gathering intel. You almost always need more information to know how to proceed further. And think about the scenario that Ms. Tamika gave us, where She had a friend or a family member who said, I don't believe in God, but I believe in higher power. It's a great opportunity to ask more questions by what she means by a higher power. And as Danny said, I think that asking appropriate questions will get you more information to help you move the conversation forward. And this is the simplest way to use the Columbo tactic, and it's virtually effortless, putting no pressure on you at all. And when used this way, a question can be a casual conversation starter. It could buy you valuable time if you get stuck. It can alert you to weaknesses, flaws, or ambiguities, and it can give you valuable information for this and further encounters. So use the Columbo. So here's the first Columbo question. What do you mean by that? Or you could use some variation of that. In Ms. Tamika's example, you could say, what do you mean by higher power? Or as Danny stated earlier, what do you mean by proof? This is a clarification question that helps you learn what the person thinks so you don't misunderstand him or her, or worse, misrepresent them. And this question should be delivered with a mild, genuinely inquisitive fashion. It also forces the person to be precise in their meaning, as many people object to Christianity for reasons they haven't completely thought through themselves. When thinking about the example of this young man that said there is no God, it's irrational, it's entirely possible he heard that or read that in a meme, or heard it in a TikTok video or something like that, and it may have just connected with them. So if you ask them leading questions, then you would be able to find out if they really believe that, or is that just something they had heard over a period of time. So here's a couple of examples of the Columbo tactic in action. When someone says there is no God, ask them, what do you mean by God? If they mean an old man with a beard who sits on a throne out in space, Christians don't believe that either. When someone says miracle stories were added to the Bible, ask, what do you mean by added to? Here you're trying to determine how someone adds lines of text to thousands of handwritten documents circulating around the Mediterranean region in the first few centuries. This problem also applies to those who say the Bible has been purposely altered. The first Columbo question accomplishes 5 important objectives. First, it immediately engages your friend in an interactive way. Second, it flatters him or her because it shows genuine interest in their view. Third, it forces them to think more carefully and more precisely, maybe for the first time, about their intended meaning. Fourth, it gives you valuable information about your friend's exact position. And lastly, it puts you in the driver's seat of the conversation. But be sure to pay attention to their response. If it's unclear, follow up with more clarification questions. You could say something like, let me see if I understand you on this. Then feedback the view to make sure that you got it right. By the way, don't be surprised if you get the sounds of silence response when you ask this question. Some people merely repeat what they've been socialized to say and have never really thought about what they actually mean. And when asked for clarification, they get caught flat-footed and don't know how to respond. Your question graciously prods them to actually think through their view, and maybe for the first time. So wait them out and give them time to think before jumping in again. All right, to recap what we've talked about here tonight. First, we talked about the missing piece that sometimes makes conversation so difficult, which is that bridge from content to conversation. Second, we learned the value of using the tactical approach when discussing Christianity. Tactics help you manage the conversation by getting you into the driver's seat and keeping you there. Tactics help you maneuver effectively in the face of opposition, and tactics help your conversation seem more like diplomacy than D-Day. Next, we define tactics and distinguish them from strategy. Strategy involves the big picture, which in our case means the content information and the reasons why someone should believe Christianity is true. And tactics, by contrast, involve the details of maneuvering a conversation. So number 4 is we learned some dangers of using tactics. Tactics are not tricks, slick ruses, or clever ploys that belittle or humiliate non-Christians. We want to make sure that we're not causing any offense there. Tactics are used to gain footing to maneuver and exploit the other person's bad thinking so that you can guide them to the truth. And then fifth, I suggested a modified goal for your conversations, focusing on gardening instead of trying to close the deal, and try to put a stone in their shoe, aiming to make smaller steps to move someone toward the Lord. And then finally, I introduced you to the game plan itself, the Colombo Tactic. Colombo is a disarming way to take the initiative using carefully selected questions to productively advance the conversation. The Colombo Tactic is advantageous because questions are an excellent conversation starter. They're interactive by nature, inviting others to participate in the dialogue. They're neutral, protecting you from just preaching. There are helpful ways of making headway without stating your own case. They are able to buy you valuable time, and they are essential in keeping you in the driver's seat of the conversation. And the first step of your game plan is to gather information with the question, what do you mean by that? Or again, some variation thereof. And the question allows a person to clarify his meaning so you don't misunderstand or misrepresent them. And this question also forces the other person to think more carefully about his exact meaning. So that's what I have for you tonight. Any questions or comments on what we've talked about so far?
You know, Chris, that the questions remind me of when I used to work, when I was a supervisor at this job. We had to do something we called root cause analysis on our team, on our the people that worked under us. And one of the tactics was called the 5 why method. So it's supposed to be proven that if you ask why a different way 5 different times, you can tend to get to the root cause of why a person thinks or does the things that they do. So it kind of reminds me of that in a sense.
And basically that tactic of the 5 whys is part of process reengineering. You learn that in like CMMI or Six Sigma.
Yeah, that's what I learned it in. Yeah.
I can confirm we have that in fitness and nutrition as well.
Yeah, that's fine.
And actually, it is a good tactic.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a good tactic, although sometimes it can be frustrating. And Jamel, you probably know this as well as any of us with who have had small kids or have small kids now. Sometimes that question why can be kind of aggravating.
Oh yeah.
So we do want to make sure that we're changing it up and not just saying why. Before you know it, you'll get to the point of it's because I said so.
Yeah. Well, it also frustrates other people too, like because they really don't know why. So they don't know their reasons. That then you'll figure out that they don't even know why they, like you said earlier, they don't even know why they think the way they think. So they get frustrated and it just turns into I don't know, and they don't want to talk anymore kind of thing.
Right. Which is why it's incumbent upon us to remain winsome, so that we don't turn this into an abusive thing where we just beat the person down and they just want to walk away and never talk to us again.
Right. Agreed.
Thanks for that, Jamel.
Chris, what does winsome mean?
Winsome?
Yes.
That means kind of lighthearted and approachable. Did that help?
Yes.
Okay. Anyone else?
I always in my head likened the word winsome to like you want to win some of them. So you want to be, likable and all that. It's probably silly, but that's how I remember it.
I probably should have had you define that word from the jump.
I like it.
All right, so I know we're not too deep into this yet, but what do you guys think about the approach of asking questions as you're moving into conversations rather than, some people have the approach of beating somebody over the head with a Bible? Do you think you would be more comfortable going into a conversation by asking questions rather than Did you know you're a sinner? Well, questions that are different than, do you know you're a wicked sinner on your way to hell?
Well, it won't hurt as much.
I've been asking questions my whole career, so it makes perfect sense to me.
No, that's great. So, Ms.
What was
Renee,
that?
have you? Oh, Ms. Renee said that she's been asking questions her whole career, so it makes sense to her. So, with that, Ms. Renee, have you ever considered using questions in spiritual conversations?
Yes.
Excellent.
I think I asked too many questions, so I just always want to know. Sometimes, I challenge, but it's not, I try not to challenge in a bad way, but my brain is crazy. So like, I just always ask questions. I've been like that all of my life. And I've always been told you don't know something if you don't ask. So I just, I'm just full of questions. They may not always make sense, because I'm not getting it out right, but eventually, I can get it to where it's understood, or even I can understand it, but it's always a question thing for me. So I tend to ask people questions when something doesn't make sense. And if it's pertaining to God, I really just want to know why they feel the way they do. Like, why don't you believe this? Or why would you believe that? Just want to know. And if it's any way that I can help, the unbelief behind it, or why they feel like that, then that's what I try to do.
Well, I would say, Ms. Tamika, you keep asking questions. I think there's nothing wrong with that approach. And anybody who is actually interested in helping other folks would be more than happy to answer those questions. And you're absolutely right. If you continue to ask questions, you may help put that stone in their shoe we've been talking about. All right. Any other thoughts? I don't want to keep you till. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. So Chris, I think that one part of this is also to. You may have said this early in the class. I know I jumped in about 7:30, I think. But one thing is just to pray and make sure that the Lord helps us to ask sincere questions, right? So not just simply, asking questions because you're trying to catch somebody, or in some kind of a catch-22, or kind of a stomp you kind of a deal, but just to genuinely want to ask questions, because sometimes people can sense that, right? If we're asking kind of questions because we're trying to have a gotcha moment. And I think that's what Greg is talking about, is just having this sense where we're trying to genuinely be inquisitive. Obviously, we have a purpose for why we're asking questions, but to try to really, at the same time, want to ask those questions in a way where we're genuinely interested in why a person believes what they believe, or how they came to that conclusion. So I guess I would just encourage us to be to sincerely pray that we can be learners of people, right? For the purpose of trying to win them to Christ. But I truly do want to know the answer to this question. I truly do want to hear your answer as a person to this question. So just a matter of motive and being sincere, I think is crucial to this tactic too.
Absolutely, and that's awfully sage advice of you, Pastor, or Dr. Pastor. And I think that when we're having conversations and we're asking people questions, if they don't pick on it immediately, at some point in their conversation, they will pick up on whether or not you are sincere, or are you looking for that gotcha, like asking why, that eighth why that nobody can answer. I think people will understand that you're trying to have that gotcha moment rather than sincerely trying to get to know the person and their view, and whether or not they know why they have their view. I think that's really good. Okay. Oh, and another thing you mentioned, Pastor, that I thought was really a great point as well. When you're in conversations with people on spiritual matters, I think that it's always helpful to be praying through that conversation. I know that I'm not real good at multitasking, but one of the things that I want to do is not only listen intently to what the person is saying to me, but in the meantime, I'm also praying, Lord, give me wisdom, help me to understand, help me to say the right things and not to be offensive. So I think that's really great advice too. So thank you for that as well. All right, any other thoughts? If not, I want to thank everybody for joining me tonight, and I hope that this has been helpful to you, and I hope you'll be back next week for our next session. And before I let you go, let me pray, and then we'll